Hey guys, tonight we're feeding a bent wire into a tiny hole in a wall and shouldering through a 2.5-ton door into the wildest, most hypocritical, and most strangely productive era in American drinking history, Prohibition. Not the Great Gatsby version, not the feather boas and Art Deco glamour your brain conjures from old movie posters. The real thing. The version where the government was poisoning its own citizens, doctors were writing 11 million whiskey prescriptions a year, and horse-drawn sleighs were hauling bootleg bourbon across a frozen river at midnight while federal agents tried to blend in as gravediggers. If you're the sort of person who finds quietly deranged American history slightly more relaxing than meditation apps, hit the like button and subscribe, but only because the mood genuinely takes you, not because I asked. And a quiet thanks to whoever dropped this topic into my suggestion list. I hope your blanket is exactly the right weight tonight, I hope your drink is properly labelled, and I hope nobody has rifled through your handbag this evening on suspicion of a flask. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. It's somehow the small hours somewhere on this map, which, during Prohibition, would have been absolutely peak business hours. Dim the lights, turn on a fan, settle in, pull the blanket up, and if you happen to keep anything in your bathtub overnight, please confirm tonight that it isn't gin. Have you ever sat down and pictured yourself, in any real detail, in a dark hallway, whispering a password through a small sliding panel and hoping the man on the other side decides you're allowed in? What were the chances the cocktail you just paid $1.50 for wasn't going to kill you? Why did an era explicitly designed to eliminate drinking somehow produce more drinking, more organized crime, more cocktail recipes, and better jazz venues than the decade before it? Did doctors really just hand out whiskey prescriptions like loyalty punch cards? The grape brick, what exactly was printed on that warning label, and who did they think they were fooling? Could you survive a night at a place where the hostess greeted you personally by calling you a sucker and charged $25 for the privilege? And what actually happens to the bottles when the cops knock? Do you hear the chute? Or does the sewer just quietly handle it for you? Congratulations. You've just woken up in New York City, 1925. There's sawdust under your shoes, a single bulb swinging overhead, and somewhere in this basement a man is playing trumpet like the law doesn't exist. Which tonight, technically, it doesn't. Good luck. You stand in an alley off West 52nd Street at 9:10, looking at a door that doesn't want to be a door. There's no sign, there's no awning. There's a small sliding panel at eye level, and a man on the other side of it who is paid specifically to decide whether you exist. You give him the word. It's a word someone passed to you at a dinner party 3 nights ago, and the dinner party host received it from a lawyer who received it from a cousin. The word changes. Not on a schedule anyone tells you about. It changes when it changes, and if you show up with last week's word, the panel slides shut and you stand in the alley reconsidering your social network. The word is the whole system. It is a password, a background check, and a character reference compressed into one syllable that you're expected to deliver at normal volume while appearing completely unbothered on a street that is definitely not surveilled. Let's talk about the panel. It's not a peephole. It's a small sliding door, maybe 4 inches wide, and the man behind it has seen a lot of faces and has opinions about all of them. His name is something like Clarence. Clarence has a jawline like a load-bearing wall and the interpersonal warmth of a toll booth. He slides the panel open, looks at you the way a customs official looks at a passport that has been to too many countries, and makes a decision in under 3 seconds. If you're wearing the right coat and you said the word without blinking, the panel slides back and the door opens inward. If you're not, it doesn't. The door swings on a heavy hinge and leads somewhere unremarkable on purpose. A coat check in a narrow corridor, maybe a staircase going down. The entrance is designed to feel like a holding room between the legal world and whatever is about to happen next. A kind of bureaucratic airlock. The smell changes first. Cigarette smoke, yes, but also something yeasty and warm underneath it. The smell of a room that has been full of people doing something slightly illegal for several hours already. New York City in 1922 has somewhere between 20,000 and 100,000 of these doors. Before Prohibition, there were 15,000 legal saloons. The math has gotten out of hand. The Volstead Act took effect January 17, 1920, defined intoxicating liquor as anything over 0.5% alcohol by volume, and accidentally turned the entire city into a logistics problem. The saloons didn't disappear. They got a hallway and a Clarence. Of course, the word speakeasy is older than this. Pittsburgh newspapers used it in 1889. The instruction was literal: speak quietly near the door, so the neighbours don't call anyone. By 1922, it's less a warning and more a piece of theatre. The door, the panel, the word, it's a ritual that exists to make you feel like you earned what's on the other side. You did not earn it. You know a lawyer's cousin. Clarence slides the panel shut behind you and turns back toward the next set of footsteps in the alley. Marjorie, the coat check girl at the bottom of the stairs, takes your coat with both hands and hangs it on a numbered hook without looking at the number. She already knows the number. She's been here since 6 and she'll be here until 2, and she holds your coat like it's a minor secret she's agreed to keep for the evening. She hands you a small brass token, smooth, blank, and unreasonably warm from her palm. It means nothing except that your coat is now her problem and you are now the establishment's problem, which is a different kind of welcome. You turn the corner at the bottom of the stairs. The room opens up. It's louder than the street suggested it would be. It's brighter than you expected underground to be. Someone is playing piano near the far wall, and a woman in a dropped-waist dress is laughing at something that wasn't that funny but sounds like it was. The bar is along the left side, and behind the bar the bottles are arranged with the confidence of objects that don't know they're illegal. You are, technically, breaking federal law. So is everyone in the room. So is the piano player. So is Marjorie and her numbered hooks and her brass tokens. It's 1922, and the whole city has agreed, collectively and without a meeting, that this particular law is not going to be the one they follow. The door exists anyway. The word exists anyway. Clarence stays employed. The ritual holds even when everyone inside is in on it. You dress for the night at 9:15, and the first decision is which leg. The flask is flat, the flask is curved. The flask is shaped exactly to the outside of your right thigh, and the right thigh is the one you favour because that's the one your dress slides over more cleanly. You roll the silk stocking up over it. You roll the second stocking up over your bare leg so they match. The match is the alibi. The alibi is the whole point of the outfit. Let's talk about the dress. It ends above the knee. Before 1920, ending above the knee was a statement. Now it's logistics. The dropped waist means nothing is cinched where a flask would print. The fabric is thin enough to move, but structured enough not to betray you. You've developed, over 2 years of this, a particular walk, a kind of glide that keeps the flask seated and the stocking from rolling. It looks like confidence. It is not confidence. It's load management. The rest of the ensemble has its own agenda. The hair is bobbed and deliberately bare at the neck. No upswept pinning that would catch on a coat collar and shake something loose on the sidewalk. The makeup is visible. Rouge on the cheeks, kohl around the eyes. Lip colour that in 1918 would have gotten you categorised as a woman of a specific type, and in 1922 just means you're going out. Your mother has opinions about this. You do not invite your mother. The silk stockings cost about $1.40 apiece. $1.40 was most of a factory girl's daily wage. You roll them past the knee on purpose. The silk is sheer enough that the flask is only invisible to someone who isn't looking. Most people aren't looking. Most people are, in fact, working very hard not to look. A woman named Dolores, who lives 2 floors up and whose husband thinks she plays bridge on Thursdays, comes to your door at 9 sharp to walk with you. She adjusts one glove with the focused attention of a jeweller inspecting a setting. She doesn't ask about your leg. You don't ask about her handbag, which is heavier than a handbag should be and makes a soft sound when she sets it down, like a very small, very disappointed bell. The outfit, top to bottom, is built to argue your case. Everything about it is technically legal. The hemline is scandalous but not illegal. The makeup is provocative but not prohibited. The flask is concealed, which is the relevant point, and the liquid inside it was obtained through a transaction that is the subject of some legal ambiguity depending on which courtroom you ask. You're basically a terms of service disagreement in a dropped waist dress. Of course, the flask has to come from somewhere. Yours was purchased from a man named Eddie, who operates out of a shop that sells tobacco and also, apparently, flat, curved and stubbornly unmarked objects, designed to conform to the human thigh. Eddie has a glass case. Eddie has a hand-lettered sign that says novelty items. The sign does not specify what the items are novel alternatives to. Eddie wraps the flask in tissue paper the way a jeweller wraps a ring, which is either charming or unsettling depending on how you feel about Eddie. You check the mirror once. The dress is right. The stocking is right. The flask is invisible to the degree that the evening requires. You pick up your own handbag, light, correct, containing nothing that clunks. Dolores is already in the hall, adjusting the second glove with the same jeweler's focus, unbothered by the weight. The two of you walk toward the stairs with the perfectly calibrated ease of women who have nowhere unusual to be. You sit down at a table the size of a dinner plate, and a man in a tuxedo hands you a card with cocktail names on it. The Bee's Knees, the Sidecar, the Mary Pickford, the Between the Sheets. You order the Bee's Knees because the Bee's Knees is honey and lemon juice, and honey and lemon juice are what you put on top of something that tastes like the inside of a bathtub. The drink arrives in a glass. The glass is cold. The taste is mostly the lemon. Let's talk about what's actually in the glass. Bathtub gin is not a metaphor. Someone filled a bathtub, an actual residential bathtub in an apartment 3 blocks from here, with industrial neutral spirit, dropped in juniper berries and a handful of other things that smelled botanical, and let it sit. The vessel had to be a bathtub because it was too tall to fit under a kitchen tap. This costs less than $1 per gallon to produce. You paid 50 cents for this glass. The math is not in your favour, but the math is never in your favour. Before Prohibition, a whiskey tasted like whiskey, and you drank it, and that was the arrangement. Now the whiskey tastes like something that was whiskey in the general philosophical sense, and the gin tastes like the juniper berries are fighting the kerosene. The workaround is honey, lemon, grenadine, whatever citrus is available. A waiter named Victor refills the breadbasket without looking at you. He does this with the practiced neutrality of a man who has been told, specifically, not to notice things. The breadbasket is not why you're here, and Victor is aware of this. The cocktail card is why you're here. The cocktail costs you between 25 cents and $1.50, depending on which establishment you're in and how seriously they take the tuxedos. $1 in 1925 is roughly $17 today. You're paying $17 for honey, lemon, and something that last week was legally classified as industrial solvent. Of course, the price went up. Before Prohibition, a beer cost 10 cents. The beer was legal, the beer was regulated, and the beer was a beer. Now the beer, if there is beer, comes from a man named Owney Madden, who sells it to speakeasies across the city and calls it Madden's No. 1. The name implies there is a No. 2. There isn't, or if there is, nobody's confirmed it. The card in your hand is doing something more than listing drinks. The gin tastes wrong, so the bartender invented drinks that are supposed to taste like this. You're not drinking bad spirits masked by citrus, you're drinking a bee's knees, which is a thing that has a name and a reputation and was apparently served to someone important once. The glass is still cold. The lemon is still doing most of the work. Victor refills the basket. Nobody ordered the bread. A speakeasy like this one runs out of a building with sawdust on the floor and a door with a sliding panel that someone's cousin built in an afternoon. The cocktail card is doing a great deal of the labour. Victor refills the bread basket again. The bread is fine. The check comes and you do the small piece of math you have learned to do without flinching. 1 drink, $1. 2 drinks, $2. 3 drinks and you're at the price of a hotel room across the street. Before Prohibition, the same amount of alcohol cost 10 cents at the saloon where your father drank. You do not bring this up. You pay the $1. You tip the waiter. You signal for one more, because the night is young and the $1 has already been spent. Let's talk about where that $1 actually goes. The bartender keeps maybe 8 cents of it. The house takes its share. And then there is the other share, the one that leaves the building in an envelope, usually on a Tuesday, usually handed to a man who does not drink on the premises and does not give his name. Operating this room costs the owner a steady monthly payment to the local police precinct. That buys him the right to keep the lights on. It does not buy him warmth. It does not buy him loyalty. It buys him Tuesday's envelope being accepted without comment. The math goes further. The bottles themselves cost the owner between $1 and $4 each, depending on quality and on how many people touch them between Windsor, Ontario, and your glass. The markup is extraordinary. The risk premium is baked in. A mid-sized speakeasy in this city is grossing a small fortune a week, which sounds like a lot until you start counting the envelopes. There are more envelopes than you'd think. There is an envelope for the precinct. There is an envelope for the ward boss. There is, on occasion, a smaller envelope for the man who inspects the building for fire code violations and has opinions about back exits. Nora, the woman who takes your coat near the door, has worked here for 2 years and handles the envelope calendar with the practiced calm of someone who does payroll for a medium-sized company. She writes the amounts in a ledger that does not exist officially. She remembers every figure. She does not write them down twice. The dollar in your hand pays for more than the cocktail. It pays for the bartender's 8 cents and the bottle's $1, and the precinct's monthly envelope and the fire inspector's smaller envelope and the back stairs that don't get inspected. The bee's knees in your hand costs $1. The Tuesday envelope costs everyone a little more. You don't see the envelope. That's included in the price. The federal agents running enforcement on all of this earn about the price of 1,000 cocktails a year, which is to say not enough money to be incorruptible and also make rent. Some of them aren't. Most of them aren't. The ones who are tend to get reassigned somewhere inconvenient, like Kansas, and yet the check arrives and you pay it. You pay it because the alternative is going home, and going home is not the same as going somewhere. The dollar is a small price for a room that stays open past 10, for a piano player who knows 300 songs, for the fact that nobody here is checking your papers or asking your business or remembering your name in the morning. $1. You smooth it onto the table. You signal Victor. He appears from wherever Victor appears from, which is always slightly behind you, always at the exact right moment, like a very polished ghost with a cocktail tray. You meet a friend for coffee at a place on Madison Avenue at 2:30 on a Friday, and she leans across the table and tells you the new word. The old word stopped working on Tuesday. The new word is 2 syllables, easy to remember, and the kind of word you would never say to a stranger on the street. You repeat it back to her. She nods. She also gives you the new address, because the place on West 49th moved last weekend and is now on West 47th. This is how information moves in 1925, not by telephone, not by advertisement, and certainly not by anything written down anywhere. You carry the word in your head, and you carry the address in your head, and somewhere across the city, roughly 20,000 other people are doing the same thing on the same Friday, each of them holding a slightly different version of the same map, all of it updating in real time. Let's talk about the door. It isn't a door, technically. It's a wall with an interruption in it, a panel, a slot, a small rectangle of space at face height that slides back when someone on the other side decides you're worth the trouble. You knock the right number of times, or you ring the bell in the right rhythm, or you say the word to the wood, and then you wait. The panel opens. A pair of eyes looks at you with the professional skepticism of a man who has been lied to before and expects to be lied to again. He's deciding, in roughly 4 seconds, whether you look like a friend or a federal agent. Sometimes these are the same person. He doesn't know that yet. A doorman named Mickey works one such panel on West 47th. Mickey's tell is that he tips his head slightly left when he doesn't recognize a face, the same way a dog does when it hears a new sound. You know this because the friend on Madison Avenue told you. She told you what to wear, what to say, and not to bring anyone Mickey hasn't already seen. Mickey has been at this door for 8 months. He knows 800 faces, watchful, weathered, and reliably familiar by now, and he has turned away, by his own rough count, at least 40 people who turned out to be nobody dangerous. The 41st one had a badge. Mickey is now employed at a different door. The addresses are the thing that keeps everyone honest. A speakeasy doesn't need to be good. It just needs to not be where it was last week. Some of them move 3 times in a single season, dragging their sawdust and their bar stools and their 2-burner hot plate through the back alleys of Midtown like a very loud theatrical production touring the wrong venues. The liquor gets moved in crates through a laundry on the ground floor. The laundry doesn't ask questions. The laundry's owner takes a flat fee and spends it on a new set of presses. This is, in its way, a very efficient supply chain. You get the word through someone you trust, who got it through someone they trust, all the way back up a chain that terminates, eventually, at whoever is running the room. The system has no directory, no central office. No one is keeping a master list of speakeasies and their current hours. Although at least 3 journalists have tried and all 3 got their notes confiscated. What you have instead is a city of 30 people who each tell 30 people, and by Thursday evening every banker and chorus girl and newspaper editor in Manhattan knows what you know, which is that the word this week is 2 syllables and the room is on West 47th. Of course the word changes. The word always changes, not because the police don't know it. The police know it before you do, and frequently suggested it. The word changes because the ritual of changing it is the point. If the door opened for everyone without ceremony, it would just be a bar. You run a club on West 49th Street, and on the first of every month you put $400 into a manila envelope and hand the envelope to a man named Pat. Pat is a lieutenant at the precinct. Pat is also your uncle's wife's cousin, which is how Pat became your Pat. The $400 covers the club. The club is the part of the arrangement that everyone in the precinct understands without needing to discuss it out loud. The envelope is not a bribe. Nobody in this transaction uses the word bribe. The envelope is a courtesy, the way a fruit basket is a courtesy. Except the fruit basket doesn't come with implied consequences if you forget to send it in October. You hand it over in a handshake, folded once, and Pat tucks it into the inside of his coat with the practiced ease of a man who has done this so many times the motion has stopped registering as motion. He'll nod. You'll nod. This is the whole meeting. Let's talk about what $400 buys. It buys 12 raids that don't happen. It buys 3 that do, because the Bureau sends someone Pat doesn't control and the precinct needs to produce a number. But Pat makes sure the 3 that do happen arrive on a Tuesday afternoon, when the club is nearly empty and the bar shelves have already been cleared of anything that photographs badly. You lose 2 bottles of rye and a crate of mediocre Canadian whiskey you weren't going to serve anyway. The paperwork goes through. A fine is paid. The fine is smaller than the crate. The agents who can't be bought can usually be reassigned. Izzy Einstein, the one famous agent who actually tried, 4,900 arrests, disguises, the whole theatrical production, got fired in 1925. The official reason was that he was attracting too much press attention. The press attention was the point. Nobody liked the press attention. Now, Pat is not the only envelope. There's a separate arrangement for the captain, which goes through a different intermediary, a man named Costello, who runs a dry cleaning business on 9th Avenue, and whose shirts are always crisp, white, and disconcertingly judgmental. There's a smaller amount for the beat cop who walks past the door on Friday and Saturday nights, which you leave inside a folded copy of the Daily Mirror on the second step from the bottom. He doesn't knock. The paper is gone when you check at 11. A city magistrate dismisses a case for the 3rd time in a calendar year and writes down a procedural error that took him 40 seconds to invent. A jury hears a case in which the evidence includes 2 witnesses, a ledger, and a photograph, and returns a not guilty verdict in under an hour. The jurors go home, the ledger goes back in a box, the photograph goes wherever photographs go. This is where Vera comes in. Vera is your bookkeeper, and Vera keeps 2 sets of numbers in 2 notebooks that look identical on the outside and are nothing alike on the inside. One notebook lives in the drawer, the other one lives under the false bottom of a hat box on the second shelf of her apartment closet, which she refers to, without irony, as the archive. Vera updates the archive on Sunday mornings. She brings her own pen. She has strong opinions about the pen. The club grosses a comfortable sum each week, depending on the weekend and whether the jazz trio shows up. The envelope to Pat is $400 a month. The arrangement with the captain runs another $250. The beat cop costs less than your bar tab on a slow Wednesday. What's left after the whiskey and the wages and the ice and the envelopes is a number that would make your father furious, mostly because he never thought of it first. You sit on a leather chair in a doctor's office on West 23rd Street, and the doctor does not look up from his pad. He asks what's wrong. You say you're feeling weak. He says, how weak? You say weak enough. He writes on the pad. The pad has carbon paper underneath. He tears off the top sheet and hands it to you, and you hand him $3. The whole transaction takes about 90 seconds. You leave with a prescription for a pint of whiskey and an address on 6th Avenue. The Volstead Act has a carve-out for medicinal liquor. This is not a loophole. It is a door left open, with a welcome mat, and a sign above it that says, physicians only, and underneath that, in smaller letters, $3 each. Before Prohibition, doctors write roughly 1 million whiskey prescriptions a year. By 1928, they're writing nearly 11 million. There was no corresponding epidemic of weakness. Let's talk about what the prescription actually does. It's not a prescription. It's a receipt. You take it to a licensed pharmacy. There are 12,000 of them operating in the United States with federal permits to dispense medicinal spirits, and the pharmacist retrieves a bottle from a shelf that has been locked since January 1920 and is now considerably less full than it used to be. The bottle is labelled with the patient's name, the dosage, and the physician's signature. The dosage is generally interpreted loosely. Your knees feel better already. Doctor. Feldman on West 23rd, not his real name. though the office is real enough, with a rubber plant by the door and a framed certificate from a school in Philadelphia, sees between 40 and 60 patients a day. He doesn't examine anyone. He has a stethoscope on the desk in the way that some people have a decorative bowl of keys. It came with the office. He writes the pad, takes the $3, tears the sheet with a quick, practiced and faintly bored motion. He has been doing this since 1921 and has recently replaced the leather chair for the second time. The leather does not last. The pharmaceutical companies running the licensed distilleries are doing fine. Brown-Forman, which makes Old Forester bourbon, is one of 6 distilleries granted a federal license to keep producing whiskey for medicinal purposes during Prohibition. They are not struggling. They are, in fact, the only legal whiskey operation in Kentucky, which makes them less a distillery and more a monopoly wearing a doctor's coat. Of course, the prescription system has a natural ceiling. You can only fill so many prescriptions before the paperwork attracts attention. Sacramental wine picks up the slack. Between 1925 and 1929, American sacramental wine production rises by 800,000 gallons. Church membership does not rise by 800,000 gallons. The grapes have become more devout than the congregation, and nobody in the Bureau of Internal Revenue wants to have that conversation with the Archbishop. Meanwhile, a pharmacist named Harold, an actual pharmacist, licensed, trained, with a mortar and pestle he uses only for display, stocks his back shelf with permits and his front shelf with aspirin, and his middle shelf with cough syrup that is mostly codeine, and his entire professional life with the low-grade tension of a man who has decided to thread a needle while running. He fills your prescription without comment. He puts it in a paper bag. He says, "Have a good evening." You do. You buy the grape brick at a grocery on First Avenue for $1.50. The brick is a rectangle of dried, compressed grapes, about the size of a small loaf of bread. The label is large and printed in 3 colors. The label tells you what not to do. Do not dissolve this brick in a gallon of water. Do not store the resulting liquid in a covered crock at room temperature for 3 weeks. Do not, under any circumstances, allow it to ferment. The label is very specific. The label is also, if you follow it in reverse, a complete winemaking tutorial. Every step that will produce a drinkable Zinfandel is listed in the correct order under the heading of prohibited actions. The California winemakers who designed this label are not confused about what they're doing. They are, in fact, doing it on purpose. This is basically an IKEA instruction sheet, except the warnings are the assembly guide. Before Prohibition, California had a functioning wine industry. After January 17, 1920, it had a problem. Grapes still grew. Vineyards still needed revenue. The Volstead Act, however, had left a small door open. Households were legally permitted to produce up to 200 gallons of non-intoxicating fruit juice per year. The phrase non-intoxicating fruit juice is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The wine growers decided to let the phrase work harder. The grape brick came in varietals: Cabernet, Burgundy, Virginia Claret. Each label carried the same careful warnings, arranged in the same careful order, about the same careful sequence of steps that you must not perform. Some labels included a note at the bottom: "Do not place the sealed crock near a warm stove, as warmth accelerates the process we are warning you not to begin." A woman named Mrs. Patrice Novello on East 106th Street reads this, nods once, and moves her crock closer to the radiator. By 1929, California grape acreage had nearly doubled since Prohibition began. The vineyards weren't struggling, they were thriving. The price per ton of wine grapes went from roughly $10 before the amendment to nearly $100 by the late 20s. Nobody in the industry was particularly troubled by this. The grapes, for their part, had no opinions. They just dried, patient, plump, and quietly profitable on the racks. The home fermentation economy ran parallel to everything else: the prescriptions, the sacramental wine, the bathtub gin, as a quieter, more domestic branch of the same general project. You didn't need a speakeasy connection or a doctor willing to write you a note. You needed a grocery, $1.50, and the ability to read a warning label as if it were instructions, which it was. The whole operation smelled faintly of yeast and damp wool for about 3 weeks, and then it smelled like wine. Your upstairs neighbour, a retired postal clerk named Mr. Tester, knocks on the door on day 22 and asks if something is ready. Something is ready. The crock sits on your kitchen table. You lift the lid, The smell that comes out is recognizably wine and also recognizably something that has been living in your kitchen for 3 weeks without supervision. It's not the 21 Club. It is not the bee's knees in a frosted coupe served by a man in a white jacket. It is homemade burgundy from a compressed brick, slightly cloudy, slightly warm. You pour 2 glasses. Mr. Tester accepts his without comment. The label, folded neatly on the counter, has done exactly what it said it wouldn't. You measure juniper berries on a kitchen scale at 3 on a Tuesday afternoon, and the scale tips at 4 ounces. 4 ounces is what the recipe calls for. The recipe was given to you by a woman who lives 2 floors down and learned it from her sister. The bathtub is already full of 5 gallons of industrial alcohol you bought from a man who knows a man at a chemical supply on Greenwich Street. The juniper goes in, the orange peel goes in. You set the kitchen timer for 72 hours. The bathtub is not a bathtub anymore, it's a distillery that also occasionally holds a person. The vessel became standard not because it was ideal for gin production, but because the standard kitchen sink couldn't fit a 5-gallon carboy. The bathtub could. The bathtub did not comment on this transition. It adapted. The industrial alcohol you're working with costs under $1 a gallon, which sounds like a bargain, until you consider what it contains. The government requires industrial alcohol to be denatured, poisoned, technically, with methanol, benzene, cadmium, and kerosene. The intent is to discourage consumption. The result is that somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 Americans die from it, between 1920 and 1933. The juniper berries are doing real work here. They're covering a lot of ground. What they cannot do is remove the methanol, which has opinions about your nervous system that no amount of citrus peel will neutralize. This is where a man named Salvatore Bonfiglio becomes relevant. Salvatore lives across the alley. He runs a small redistilling operation using a copper coil he keeps under his kitchen floorboards, and he has offered, twice, to run your neutral spirit through it before you add the botanicals. You've said no twice, partly because the charge is steep and partly because the coil smells like it has a past. Salvatore does not hold this against you. He tips his hat from the fire escape with the practiced patience of a man whose business model depends on people eventually making bad decisions. The cocktail problem is real. The gin you're producing at roughly 80 cents a gallon, if you pour it straight, tastes like a hardware store smells. The speakeasies on Bleecker Street figured this out early, which is why nobody serves it straight. They bury it in honey and lemon and call the result a bee's knees. Progress came from necessity. The necessity was terrible. 72 hours later, you ladle the gin into repurposed olive jars because the glass doesn't absorb flavor, and you've learned that from the woman downstairs, whose name is Dolores, who tests every batch by dipping a finger and waiting 3 seconds before she swallows. Dolores has a system. The system involves a small notebook where she writes numbers between 1 and 10, and one category labelled simply hardware, which means the batch goes back in. Your batch scores a 6. Dolores writes it down without expression. 6 is passing. 6 goes to the speakeasy on Morton Street in half-gallon jars, wrapped in butcher paper, carried in a shopping bag with turnips on top. The turnips are not incidental. The turnips are the entire plan. A mid-sized speakeasy in New York pays the local police precinct a flat monthly fee just to stay open, which is a stripe merchant fee, except the merchant fee buys you the right to keep selling gin to people who are technically criminals for drinking it. The gin they buy from you gets marked up and poured into a glass over chipped ice and served to a woman in silk stockings who paid 25 cents for the privilege. You made 80 cents a gallon. The speakeasy made considerably more. The police made their monthly cut. Dolores made a small notebook full of numbers. The juniper berries made the whole thing minimally survivable. The kitchen timer goes off again on Friday. You already have 6 more gallons measured out. You sit at a small round mirror by the powder room of the Elfay Club at 20 past 11, and you take a tube of lipstick out of your handbag. The lipstick is red. 6 months ago, your mother would not have left the apartment with this on her face. 6 months ago, the only women in New York who wore visible lipstick in public were on a stage or being arrested. 6 months later, you are reapplying it in front of a stranger, and the stranger is doing the same thing. The room changed. Not the lipstick specifically. Before Prohibition, respectable women did not go to saloons. Saloons were for men, and the kind of women who weren't supposed to be in saloons. Then the saloons closed, and speakeasies opened, and speakeasies didn't have the same rules because speakeasies didn't officially exist. A place that isn't supposed to be there can't very well enforce a dress code. So women walked in, and then they kept walking in. The flapper look is not an accident of fashion. It's a practical solution to a logistics problem. The dropped waist means you can move. The short hemline means you can sit on a bar stool without engineering a structural crisis. The bobbed hair means you don't need 40 minutes and 2 hairpins just to leave the house. And the silk stockings, rolled past the knee, not up to it, mean there's a gap. A gap is useful. A flat, curved, quietly engineered flask fits a gap like that with a precision that suggests someone thought about this carefully. Someone did. The thigh flask is not a novelty item. It holds 4 ounces, it rides flat against the leg, curved to follow the shape of it, and it doesn't show under the dress because the dress was bought with this specific geography in mind. You don't bring it to the El Fay Club because the El Fay Club has a bar. You bring it to the places that don't, or the places where the bar runs out, which happens more than anyone advertises. Texas Guinan runs this room. She runs several rooms actually, and the rooms keep getting raided and she keeps opening new ones, which is either entrepreneurial resilience or a personality disorder. The distinction is probably academic at this point. She greets you when you arrive, not with welcome or good evening, with hello sucker, delivered warmly with a smile, in a dress that costs more than your monthly rent. You paid $25 at the door for the privilege of hearing this. You laughed. Margaret Driscoll, who works the powder room here with a small basket of hairpins and a bottle of Chanel No. 5 she charges 2 cents to use, watches all of this with the flat, patient, and faintly regal calm of a woman who has seen every kind of face this mirror can produce. She hands you a pin you didn't ask for. You take it. She already has the next one ready. The women in this room tonight are not all the same kind of woman, and 6 years ago they would not all be in the same room. There's a secretary from Midtown in paste pearls. There's a woman in an actual fur stole whose husband is definitely somewhere in this building. There's a girl who can't be more than 20 who is applying coal liner with the focused intensity of a field surgeon. The speakeasy did something the salon and the department store never quite managed. It put everyone in a room with no particularly good reason to leave. Of course, the visible makeup still carries a charge. Your mother isn't wrong that it means something. It just means something different now than it did before. Out there it signals a kind of intent. In here, in this powder room, at this mirror, it's just maintenance. The stranger next to you caps her lipstick, looks at you in the mirror, and nods once, not a greeting, more like a quality check. You both look fine. The music is already back, loud through the door. You tuck the tube back into your handbag and stand up. The flask is still there, flat against your thigh. It's empty. You filled it before you left the apartment, which means you drank 4 ounces of Dolores's gin on the subway platform, standing very still. You walk into the 300 Club a little past midnight, and a woman with very blonde hair and a very loud voice points at you from across the room. "Hello, sucker," she says. This is Texas Guinan. This is what she calls everyone who walks in. The door has a man in a vest who charges $25 to come in. You hand him the $25. He takes it without counting. You go in. The room is loud. Texas points at the next person coming through the door and says it again. The $25 is roughly a week's wages for a factory worker in 1925. Texas charges it as a cover, not for dinner, not for a show, just for the right to stand inside the room where she is. There's no menu price that accounts for this. The math doesn't hold together if you think about it, so most people stop thinking about it at the door. Texas Guinan is from Waco, Texas, which she mentions whenever it's useful and occasionally when it isn't. She ran a vaudeville act, then a silent picture career, then a series of establishments that kept getting raided and kept reopening under slightly different names. The El Fay Club, the 300 Club, the Argonaut. The federal government closes one, she opens another. She's been arrested so many times that her lawyers know her booking number by memory. She treats each raid like a scheduling inconvenience. She is not wrong. A man named Jaime Weiss is sitting 3 tables over, and he looks like he's been here since Tuesday. He's nursing a bee's knees, and he taps the rim of his glass twice every time the music changes, which it does constantly. He doesn't look at Texas. He doesn't have to. The point is that he's here, and she's here, and the $25 was worth it, and everyone in the room has agreed to that without discussion. The show is the point. Texas works the room the way a crane operator works a crane, with complete authority and zero visible effort. She introduces acts. She heckles the hecklers. She has a line of chorus girls who perform between sets. She also has a band leader, a bouncer who weighs approximately as much as a small car, and a very specific skill for spotting a federal agent, which she deploys the same way a lighthouse deploys a beam, automatically, continuously, and aimed at the thing most likely to cause a shipwreck. Of course, the raids happen anyway. When they do, Texas appears in court wearing her best fur and tells the judge that a woman needs a little fun. She's acquitted more often than not. 12 jurors look at her, look at the law, decide the law is more embarrassing than the defendant, and send her home. This particular maneuver is having a very strong decade. The 300 Club is not the cheapest room in New York. It's not even close. A cocktail runs between 75 cents and $1.50, which would buy you 3 pre-Prohibition beers and still leave you change. But the cocktail comes in a real glass, from a real bartender, in a room where Texas Guinan might point at you and call you a sucker in front of 40 strangers. You pay for the pointing. You pay for the room. You pay for the right to say, tomorrow, that you were there. The music is live and it is loud and it does not stop. That's not an accident. Music at this volume makes it hard to hear a conversation at the next table, which is the entire point of the volume. Nobody has agreed to this aloud. Everybody understands it. You arrive at the Cotton Club on a Friday night at 10:30, and a man at the door looks at you and decides whether you are the kind of person who comes inside. The decision is not subtle. It is not based on your tie. It is based on a rule the club has never written down and has never needed to. You are the right kind. You go in. Inside, the band is black. The waiters are black. The dancers are black. Every face at every table is white. Owney Madden runs this place from a prison cell for the first 2 years, which is the kind of management structure that only makes sense during Prohibition. He took over the club in 1923 after the previous owner, a boxer named Jack Johnson, lost the lease. Madden's beer, his own label, Madden's No, won. Moves at $4 a keg to speakeasies across the city. The Cotton Club is less a passion project and more a showroom. The showroom happens to be the most famous nightclub in the country. Duke Ellington's orchestra starts its residency in 1927 and plays 6 nights a week, which means you are listening to one of the best jazz bands on earth while sipping something that may or may not contain benzene. Cab Calloway takes over the bandstand later. The show runs 2 sets a night, with elaborate choreography, Broadway-quality costumes, and lighting designed by a man who takes his job extremely seriously. The dancers rehearse every afternoon. They earn about $30 a week. The white customers at the tables are paying $25 just to sit down. A waiter named Leonard moves through the room with a tray held at shoulder height, navigating between tables without looking down, which is either impressive or deeply troubling depending on how you think about it. He's been doing this since the club opened. He knows your drink before you order it. He brings it anyway, sets it down with 2 fingers on the base of the glass, and withdraws without a word. The glass is cold, the ice is real. At establishments 3 blocks away, the ice is not always real. Here the ice is a selling point. Taxis arrive at the curb after midnight with downtown people in them. They come uptown specifically for this, for the music, for the atmosphere, for the sensation of being somewhere that feels transgressive without actually being dangerous. The newspapers call it slumming. The people doing it do not call it anything. They just stay until 3. The doorman knows every one of their faces. And yet the black residents of Harlem, whose neighborhood this is, can't buy a table. The Cotton Club sits on 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue in the center of Harlem, and the people who live on that block cannot get past the door. The rule is not written down. It doesn't have to be. The doorman has been enforcing it since 1923 and has never needed a memo. Madden himself is out of prison by 1933 and back in circulation, running the club with the quiet, watchful, and reliably patient efficiency of someone who considers paying a police precinct every month a standard operating expense, the way a restaurant budgets for linen service. The bribes are logged nowhere. The arrangement is understood. Everyone in this transaction is a professional. The cocktails are good, which is its own kind of achievement in 1927. The bar stocks actual imported liquor. Madden has supply lines, which is a polite way of saying he has people. and the bartender doesn't need to add juniper berries to anything. A bee's knees here tastes like a bee's knees. At a basement operation in the West Village, a bee's knees tastes like someone's ambition and a bad decision about neutral spirit. You finish your drink. The band starts a new set. The room is full and loud and expensive, and every person in it is breaking a federal law, including the waiter, the bartender, the doorman, the band leader, and quite possibly the man at the next table who is a city alderman. Nobody comments on this. It is Friday at the Cotton Club. This is what Friday looks like. You catch the express train at 50th Street at 10:15 with 3 people you met at a dinner party, and you ride it 26 blocks north to Lenox Avenue. This is what New Yorkers with money are doing on Friday nights in 1925. You go to Harlem. You go in evening clothes. You walk into a club where the band is the best band in the city and the waiters dance the Charleston with trays of cocktails balanced on their fingertips, and you go home at 4 a.m. The club is Small's Paradise, and Small's Paradise is not the Cotton Club. Let's be clear about that distinction, because it matters for your evening. Ed Smalls opened the place in 1925 on 7th Avenue, and he runs it with a different policy entirely. Everyone is welcome. Black patrons, white patrons, the downtown crowd in their furs, Harlem residents in their good coats, the same table, the same room, the same astonishing waiters who are dancing the Charleston right now, carrying full trays without spilling a drop, which is athletically impossible and yet is occurring in front of you. A waiter named Calvin passes your table moving sideways in a half step, tray extended, not looking at it. The cocktail on his tray is cold, level, and impossibly steady. It has resigned itself to his competence. Now, the cocktail. You ordered a bee's knees. The honey is doing heavy lifting tonight. The gin is doing its best given the circumstances. You finish it and order another one, which is the correct response. Harlem, in 1925, is, by any reasonable accounting, the center of the musical universe. The clubs are stacked up and down 7th Avenue and Lenox Avenue, the Savoy Ballroom, Connie's Inn, the Bamboo Inn, and approximately 40 other establishments operating in various states of legal ambiguity. The Savoy alone holds 4,000 people and has 2 bandstands, so the music never stops between sets. 2 bandstands. The music is literally continuous. The building does not allow silence. You live on the Upper East Side. You have a perfectly serviceable social life below 96th Street. And yet here you are, 26 blocks north in someone else's neighborhood, in your evening clothes, spending money at a pace that would concern your accountant. The newspapers call this slumming. You don't call it that. You call it going out. But the newspapers aren't entirely wrong about the economics. You are, by Harlem standards, a high-value export customer, and the clubs have priced accordingly. Prohibition did something strange to the map. The law that was supposed to close the saloons instead reshuffled the entire social arrangement of Manhattan. Downtown clubs have peepholes and anxiety. Harlem has open doors and a 4-piece brass section. The illegality is the same. The atmosphere is not. You're a visitor here, and the neighborhood knows you're a visitor. The man at the door, whose name is Terence and who has a very specific look he deploys when the third party of downtown guests arrives before midnight, knows you're a visitor. Terence gives you that look now. You tip generously. The look softens to something more like professional neutrality. The band shifts tempo. The couple at the next table stands up immediately, like they were waiting. They were waiting. The floor fills in under 30 seconds in a way that suggests everyone here has been practicing, which they have, because everyone here comes every weekend and knows exactly what this song means when the drummer hits the rim twice at the top. You finish your second bee's knees. The honey is still working. Calvin reappears at your elbow, holding a fresh tray, executing a slow pivot that has no business being as graceful as it is. You didn't order another drink. He brought it anyway. He has assessed the table and made an executive decision, and he is correct. You sit at a table at Small's Paradise on 7th Avenue at 11:30, and you wait for your order to arrive. The order is 2 bee's knees and a sidecar. The waiter who took the order took it while doing the Charleston, which is a thing the waiters at this club do. It is not a gimmick. It is the job. Your drinks arrive on a tray balanced on a hand that never stops moving, and the tray sets down without spilling a drop, and the waiter dances away from your table. The bee's knees is gin, lemon juice, and honey syrup, which sounds like a recipe a sensible person might keep. The gin in it is not from a distillery. It came from an apartment kitchen on 133rd Street where someone filled a bathtub with neutral industrial spirit, added juniper berries, stirred the whole thing with a broom handle, and decanted it into whatever bottles were nearby. The honey and lemon are doing real work here. They are not flavouring the drink so much as diplomatically suppressing it. The sidecar is cognac, lemon, and orange liqueur. The cognac is possibly cognac. In 1929, the words on the bottle are a starting point for negotiation, not a guarantee. You drink it anyway, because the room is good and the band is better, and you've ordered drinks from a man who just completed a full box step without losing your change. A bartender named Remy, who works the far end of the bar, slides a glass toward a man in a chalk-striped suit without breaking conversation or eye contact with the ceiling. The movement is completely automatic. He has made this drink 11,000 times, and his hands have formed their own separate opinion about what to do next. Meanwhile, the band is mid-set, and the floor is full. The room holds jazz the way a good wool coat holds heat. You feel it before you understand it, and by the time you think to check, it's already inside you. Small's Paradise doesn't have a cover charge, the way some places do. It doesn't greet you with "hello sucker" and extract $25 before you've located a seat, which is what Texas Guinan does 2 miles downtown at the 300 Club. Here the dynamic is different. The room trusts you. You are expected to behave like someone who has been somewhere before. You pick up the bee's knees. It is cold and slightly sweet, and the lemon cuts through the honey just enough to remind you that something beneath it once grew in the ground and had ambitions. The gin, to its credit, has settled. It is background now. The honey has won. The waiter comes back for the empty glasses. He collects them in a single sweep while completing what appears to be a pas de bourrée and deposits them somewhere behind him without looking. The busboy, a teenager named Marcus, who has been watching this move for 6 months and cannot replicate it, tracks the arc of every glass with the focused, watchful, faintly envious attention of someone calculating a geometry problem that keeps changing its own variables. You order another round. The waiter writes nothing down. He dances back toward the bar, and the order travels with him in his head, perfectly intact, while his feet do something entirely unrelated. You walk into the 21 Club on a Wednesday at 9:15, and the man at the door knows your name. He knows your name because there is a bottle in the basement with your name on it. The bottle is yours. The wine in the bottle is yours. You bought the wine before January 1920, which makes it legally your property, which means drinking it in 1925 is technically not a crime. You sit down at your usual table. You order it by name. There is no list to order from. The bottle is kept in a numbered slot. Your slot. The basement runs the full length of the building and smells the way important things smell, cool stone and cedar and something faintly alcoholic that isn't quite the wine itself, but has been living near it long enough to develop opinions. Your bottle is in a public storage unit, except the unit holds your gin and the staff brings it to your table on a silver tray without being asked. The door you came through to get here doesn't look like a door. It looks like a wall. The wine cellar entrance is sealed by something that weighs 2.5 tons and opens when you insert a wire into a small hole that is not labelled or visible and that you simply know is there. The hole doesn't announce itself. You have to already understand the door exists before you can find the hole. This is, in its way, the entire operating philosophy of the 21 Club condensed into a single piece of hardware. The bar itself has opinions. Not about you, you're fine, you have a bottle, but about federal agents. Behind the bar, at the height a bartender's right hand naturally rests, there is a button. The button is not labelled either. Pressing it tips the shelves. The bottles go down a chute. The chute empties into the city sewer. By the time a Prohibition Bureau agent is through the second door, there's nothing behind the bar but glass and ambition. The bar has rehearsed this. It goes smoothly. A waiter named Quinn sets your glass down before you ask. Quinn has been here since 1923 and moves with the quiet, level, and faintly unimpressed economy of someone who has watched the room get raided twice and wasn't rattled either time. He adjusts your fork a 1/4 inch to the right. This is not for your benefit. Quinn adjusts forks the way other people breathe. The 21 Club is one address in a city that, by some estimates, contained 100,000 speakeasies by the mid-1920s. The amendment was meant to reduce that number to 0. The math went the other way. Most of those 100,000 places were not the 21 Club. Most of them were a staircase going down, a single bulb, sawdust on the floor to absorb the spills without requiring anyone to clean them, and a bartender who poured from whatever arrived that week without excessive interest in its origin. Your coat smells like it afterward. This is considered normal. The sawdust does what it can. It isn't proud. Your bottle at the 21 Club cost you something in $1919 that felt reasonable, and now feels like the best financial decision you ever made. A cocktail here runs 50 cents to $1.50, which is roughly $17 in any money that currently means something. That same dollar, 6 years ago, bought 10 rounds of beer. The amendment didn't reduce drinking. It made drinking expensive, and then surrounded expensive drinking with architecture that could survive a federal search. This is, technically, an upgrade. You hand your coat to a young woman at a small counter inside the door, and she gives you a small wooden chip with a number on it. The number is your coat. The chip is your alibi. The young woman watches the door all night. She watches the door because the door is what she is paid to watch. The coats are the secondary job. If the door opens and a man in a federal coat is on the other side, she reaches under the counter and presses a small button that connects to a bell behind the bar. The bell doesn't ring loud. It doesn't need to. The bartender hears it the same way you hear your name spoken quietly across a crowded room, immediately, completely, with zero ambiguity about what it means. Glasses go back under the counter. The bottle disappears. Two people who were just drinking are now examining a menu they have memorized. The whole room shifts in about 4 seconds, which is faster than most people can find their keys. The hat check girl's name is something like Dorothy, and Dorothy is earning around $8 a week plus tips, which in 1925 is not nothing and is also not enough. She has memorized every regular face in the place. She knows which men are with their wives and which men are very much not with their wives. She knows who tips and who promises to tip on the way out and then doesn't. She holds all of this information the way a filing cabinet holds paper, quietly, neatly, and without comment. Dorothy slides your chip across the counter without looking at you because she is already looking at the door. The bell system is not unique to this place. It runs through the whole building in some establishments. 1 ring for federal agents, 2 rings for city police, 3 rings meaning something went wrong upstairs, and everyone should consider their options. The building has opinions. The walls are in on it. Even the fixtures have agreed at some institutional level to participate in the deception. The Prohibition Bureau has roughly 1,500 agents covering the entire country in 1920, 1,500 people to enforce a law being broken by somewhere between 20 and 30 million Americans. The math does not work. The agents know it, which is partly why the starting salary is about what a good Dorothy earns in tips over the course of 18 months, and partly why roughly 1 in 12 agents is fired for bribery within their first year. The job attracts 2 kinds of people, the genuinely committed and the entrepreneurially flexible. The second group is much larger. One agent who is genuinely committed is Izzy Einstein, a 5'5" former postal clerk from the Lower East Side who looks like someone's uncle and is therefore invisible. Izzy and his partner Mo Smith make 4,900 arrests between 1920 and 1925, using disguises that include streetcar conductors, gravediggers, football players, and at least once a complete string quartet. In New Orleans, Izzy gets served a drink within 35 seconds of arriving in the city. 35 seconds. He hasn't even put down his bag. The bartender will later reflect, presumably, on the speed of that particular mistake. Back at the hat check counter, Dorothy is watching a man near the back who has had 4 drinks and is developing the posture of someone who is about to become a problem. She doesn't press a button for this. There isn't a button for this. This one she handles with a look she gives to the floor manager, a specific look she has refined over 14 months on this job, which communicates everything and costs her nothing. The floor manager nods. 2 minutes later, the man's glass is mysteriously empty, and the waiter has developed a very poor memory for where he left the bottle. The chip in your pocket is still warm from her hand. You drop $1 into a brass bowl at the foot of the stage at the Cotton Club at midnight, and the trumpeter nods at you without missing a note. The $1 is for the band. The band is paid by the club. The club is paid by the man who runs the supply chain. The man who runs the supply chain pays the band in cash, because cash is the only thing the band can take. You drop a second $1 because the trumpeter's solo is the best thing you have heard all week. The man who runs the supply chain is Owney Madden. He's 5'5", soft-spoken, and has been convicted of manslaughter. He runs the Cotton Club from a distance because he is, at this particular moment in 1925, still technically on parole. Owney doesn't come in much. The Cotton Club runs without him the way a very organized machine runs without the person who built it, smoothly and with no interest in your questions. You are here. The people at the tables around you are white. The people on the stage are black. That's the Cotton Club's arrangement, stated nowhere in writing and enforced everywhere in practice. Duke Ellington is up there. Cab Calloway will be up there. The musicians playing the best jazz in New York City tonight are playing it for an audience that could not sit next to them at a lunch counter. The room holds both of these facts at the same time without comment. The brass bowl doesn't comment either. It just fills up. A waiter materializes at your elbow. His name is Roosevelt. Not the president, just Roosevelt, which in 1925 is a name you give a child when you want him to amount to something. He sets down a glass without spilling a drop and pivots away from the table in a slow, quiet, and perfectly economical motion that looks, very briefly, like the beginning of a dance. It isn't a dance. Or it is. At Small's Paradise across town, the waiters actually dance the Charleston while carrying the trays. Here, Roosevelt simply moves like someone who has been moving fast in small spaces for a long time and has made peace with it. The drink is good. This is not guaranteed anywhere else in the city tonight. Owney Madden's supply chain runs on a product called Madden's No, one beer, which sells to speakeasies across Harlem for $4 a keg. $4 a keg is cheap. What you're drinking isn't the keg product. You're at the Cotton Club, not a basement on 130th Street, but the point is that Owney controls what goes in the glass all the way up and down the ladder, and the top of the ladder gets the real thing. The Cotton Club charges you for being here. The cover isn't printed on a menu. It's understood. You pay it the way you pay for air in a room where someone else controls the ventilation. There's no negotiation. The coat check woman has seen people try to negotiate. She doesn't blink. The club grosses serious money on a good week. Call it the scale of a mid-sized regional music venue, except this one has no insurance, no liquor license, and a co-owner who used to run with the Gopher Gang. The musicians get the brass bowl and a flat rate. The band takes home less than the coat check, probably. The coat check takes home less than the liquor. The liquor takes home more than anyone. The liquor always takes home more than anyone. You drop a third dollar into the brass bowl when the trumpeter finishes. It's too much. You know it's too much. The dollar lands on top of the other dollars, and the trumpeter still doesn't look at you, because the trumpeter is already somewhere else entirely. 4 bars into the next thing, and the room is full of people who paid good money to watch someone be that free. You walk into a drugstore on 6th Avenue at 5:15 and put a folded piece of paper on the counter. The pharmacist unfolds the paper. The pharmacist nods. He goes to the back. He returns with a small brown bottle labelled medicinal spirits, for external use only, a glass dropper, and a printed label warning you to take no more than 1 teaspoon per hour. You pay him $4. You put the bottle in your handbag. The label is required by federal law. The teaspoon is not. The piece of paper is a prescription. Your doctor wrote it this morning in an appointment that lasted approximately 4 minutes, charged you $3, and involved no stethoscope. He has written 47 of these today. By 1928, American doctors will collectively write nearly 11 million whiskey prescriptions per year, which is basically a Costco membership, except your receipt is on a prescription pad and the product is bourbon. The Volstead Act allows this. Medicinal whiskey is a recognized treatment for anxiety, fatigue, and a diagnosis your doctor describes as general debility, which is the 1920s way of saying, you'd like a drink. The bottle doesn't look like whiskey. It's small, brown and short, the kind of container that usually holds eardrops. The dropper is a nice touch. The federal label, for external use only, is legally mandatory and universally ignored. The pharmacist who handed it to you is not confused about what you are going to do with it. He handed 43 of them out yesterday. The dropper has never been used by anyone for anything. The legitimate distilleries are still running. Brown-Forman, makers of Old Forester, holds one of only 6 federal permits to produce medicinal whiskey during Prohibition. This is not a loophole. This is a door left deliberately open in the wall of a law that was supposed to close everything. Brown-Forman's warehouses are full. Their paperwork is immaculate. Their product is, technically, medicine. You take the bottle home and set it on the kitchen shelf next to the actual eardrops. Both bottles are brown. Both have dropper caps. Your mother, visiting from Staten Island and deeply committed to the Prohibition cause, does not notice the new addition. Or she notices and says nothing. These are both plausible. The eardrops are taller. That's the only way to tell them apart in the dark. The pharmacist, his last name is Halloran, he has a small pencil moustache and the professional expression of a man who has answered the same unasked question several thousand times, slides the next customer's prescription across the counter before you've even turned toward the door. Mister. Halloran does not hurry. He also does not slow down. He maintains a pace that could be described as the steady efficiency of a man who has found his calling, and his calling has found a very favourable regulatory environment. Sacramental wine is also available, if you prefer. Between 1925 and 1929, American sacramental wine production rose by 800,000 gallons, with no corresponding increase in religious observance. The congregations are not getting larger. The communion vessels are getting heavier. A rabbi or a priest can authorize wine production for religious purposes, and the wine can be distributed to congregation members. And the definition of congregation member has become, during this particular decade, somewhat expansive. Nobody audits the pews. The $4 you paid is the official price. 3 of it is the prescription fee. 1 of it is the bottle. $1 of bourbon in 1925 is about $17 now, which means your legal medicinal whiskey costs roughly the same as a cocktail at the nicer class of speakeasy, except here you don't need a password and there's no cover charge. Mr. Halloran's drugstore does 20, sometimes 30 transactions like yours on a weekday. On Fridays, the line goes past the cold remedies. You button your coat and step back out onto 6th Avenue. The bottle sits in your bag next to your transit pass and a tin of mints. It's medicine. The federal government says so. It says so right on the label, in the same sentence it tells you not to drink it. You stand on a dock on the Detroit side of the river at 4 a.m., and a man in a wool coat hands you a clipboard. The clipboard has a list of cases. The cases are in the speedboat. The speedboat is yours for the next 40 minutes. You will take the boat across the river to a warehouse in Windsor, and you will load 80 cases onto it, and you will bring them back, and you will tie up at a different dock than the one you left from. The man with the clipboard is keeping track. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is, by 1925, the busiest border crossing for illegal liquor in the United States. 75% of all bootleg alcohol entering the country comes through here. The river is about a mile wide at its narrowest point. In the summer, speedboats make the crossing in under 10 minutes. In winter, the river freezes solid enough to walk across, and the operation doesn't stop, it just switches vehicles. Horse-drawn sleighs haul whiskey crates across the ice in the dark. The horses don't know they're breaking federal law. This is the most relaxed any participant in the supply chain has ever been. The speedboats run without lights. You navigate by the glow of Windsor across the water and by the arrangement of docks you've memorized, because writing it down is the kind of decision that ends careers. A man named Carmine handles the Windsor warehouse. He wears the same canvas jacket every night and speaks very little, which everyone agrees is the correct approach. He checks your case count against his own list, nods once, and begins loading. The two lists have never disagreed. Nobody wants to find out what happens when they do. The Detroit field office is supposed to cover the entire Michigan-Canada border. It does not cover the entire Michigan-Canada border. What it covers is the stretch of riverfront that isn't already being handled by the local police, who are handling it in the sense that they've been paid a monthly figure not to. A Prohibition agent's starting salary is $1,200 a year, about $21,000 in today's terms. The going rate for looking the other way on a mid-sized smuggling operation is considerably more than that. The bootleggers running the corridor are organized the way a shipping company is organized, which is to say, there are routes, schedules, manifests, and people responsible for each. There's also a man named Donal who stands at the American dock with a flashlight he's not supposed to use and uses it anyway because he says the dark makes him nervous. Everyone on the crew has told Donal about the flashlight. Donal nods and keeps the flashlight. In winter, the operation has a different texture. The river freezes from shore to shore in January, and the sleighs come out, actual horse-drawn sleighs loaded with crates wrapped in burlap, crossing openly on the ice in the small hours of the morning. The horse's breath comes out in clouds. The crates don't shift because the burlap is packed tight. The whole thing looks like a very purposeful, very cold agricultural delivery, which is more or less what it is, except the cargo is Canadian whiskey and the paperwork is fictional. The ice doesn't care about the Volstead Act, neither do the horses. By the time your boat ties up at the second dock, not the first one, never the first one, a truck is already waiting. The cases transfer in under 4 minutes. The truck pulls away. You sign the clipboard. The man in the wool coat is satisfied. Somewhere on the other side of the city, 80 cases of Canadian whiskey begin their second career as someone's monthly supply chain, flowing into speakeasies and backroom operations and apartment bathtubs and the personal reserves of people who swore they'd quit. The crossing took 38 minutes. You were 2 minutes under schedule. The man with the clipboard writes that down too. You sit on the bench of a wooden sleigh on a January morning at 20 below, and a horse is pulling you across 2 miles of frozen Detroit River. The sleigh has 30 cases of Canadian Club whiskey stacked in the back under a tarp. The tarp is the colour of the snow. The horse knows the route. The horse has done the route every January for 3 winters and is no longer impressed by it. You tip your hat to a man going the other way who tips his hat to you, who has 30 cases of his own under his own tarp. The river is, technically, international waters. This is a legal distinction that interests nobody on the ice in January. The Canadian side loads in Windsor. The American side unloads in Detroit. The transfer takes about 12 minutes and involves no paperwork. The horse has never once been asked to show identification. Canadian Club is the good stuff, aged, bonded, and quietly licensed, produced in a distillery by people who take grain seriously. It arrives in your country tasting like whiskey and not like anything that would later require a medical examiner. That detail matters more than you'd think right now, but it will matter considerably more by Christmas. The cases go from the river into a warehouse off Jefferson Avenue, where a man named Victor, who has a clipboard and an expression suggesting he was born specifically to have a clipboard, checks the count without looking up. 30 cases in, 30 cases marked. The clipboard doesn't have a name at the top. The clipboard has a number. Victor knows what the number means. The number knows what you're not supposed to say. From the warehouse, the cases go to speakeasies across the city, some of which are behind barber shops, some of which are behind laundries, and at least one of which is technically inside a church basement, which the congregation has agreed not to discuss. The Canadian Club gets watered down slightly at each stop, not because anyone is dishonest, but because the math only works if it does. By the time a glass reaches your table, it is about 70% what it was when it left Windsor. Still better than the alternative. The alternative is what the federal government has been producing. Industrial alcohol, which was never meant for drinking, gets denatured by law, methanol added, then benzene, then cadmium, then kerosene, on the reasonable assumption that this would discourage consumption. It does not discourage consumption. It just makes the consumption significantly more final. Between 1920 and 1933, somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 Americans die from poisoned alcohol. The range is that wide because nobody was keeping tidy records of the exact cause. Christmas 1926, New York. 32 people die from tainted liquor inside a single 24-hour period. 32. The papers report it, the government notes it. The speakeasies stay open through New Year's. Back on the river, you've made it across. The American bank is ahead, and the ice is holding, and the horse, whose name is apparently something like Duke or Major, the kind of name you give a horse doing work that deserves a title, takes the last 50 yards at a slightly faster pace because it knows there's a barn at the end. The horse is not ideologically committed to bootlegging. The horse is committed to being done with the cold. You pull up. A man with no hat and a very red neck unloads the cases without asking how your morning was. Victor's counterpart on this side has no clipboard. He has a good memory and a system for forgetting it on request. The cases disappear into the city. You turn the sleigh around. The river is still frozen. There are 3 more loads before dark. You motor out from a beach on the Long Island shore at 2:15 a.m. and your boat is small and your boat is fast and your boat is empty. 3 miles offshore there is a line of ships at anchor. The ships are legally untouchable. The ships are loaded with scotch and rum and the kind of gin that does not taste like a bathtub. You pull alongside one. You hand a man a roll of bills. He hands you crates. You motor back to the beach. The whole thing takes 40 minutes. The ships sit at what sailors call the 3-mile limit, the outer boundary of US territorial waters in 1920, which is also, not coincidentally, the outer boundary of US law. Beyond 3 miles, the Coast Guard has no jurisdiction. The ships know this. The ships have organised their entire business model around it. They sit out there in a loose floating row riding the Atlantic swell, fully lit, entirely calm, like a very well-stocked parking lot that doesn't have to answer to anyone. Bill McCoy is one of the first serious operators on Rum Row, and he has a policy. No cutting, no diluting, no industrial spirit with an afterthought of juniper. What he sells is what it says on the label. His scotch is scotch, his rum is rum. In a supply chain where gin frequently means neutral spirit touched by a man who once walked past a berry, this is a remarkable distinction. His customers remember it. TZ. His customers tell other customers. His name becomes a phrase. When someone says the whiskey is the real McCoy, they mean it hasn't been improved with kerosene. The Coast Guard does eventually figure out that 3 miles is a problem. By 1924, they renegotiate international agreements and push the limit to 12 miles. The Rum Row ships move. 12 miles is longer. 12 miles means bigger boats, faster engines, more fuel, more exposure time on the water. The Coast Guard also adds new cutters and starts intercepting runs more aggressively. A Coast Guard cutter can do about 12 knots. The rum-running boats the bootleggers are now commissioning can do 25. The rum-running boats win this conversation. A Coast Guard agent named Whitey, who works the Long Island Sound out of a converted fishing vessel, keeps a logbook. The logbook is leather-bound, small, and faintly damp. It records attempted intercepts. It records mostly the stern lights of faster boats disappearing into the dark. Whitey drinks coffee from a thermos. The thermos is not regulation. Nothing about this posting is. The economics work out clean from the shoreside. You buy a crate of genuine imported scotch off a Rum Row ship for roughly $15. That same crate, broken down into bottles and moved through a mid-tier Manhattan speakeasy, earns back $200. The boat costs money. The fuel costs money. The crew costs money. The local police precinct costs $400 a month, which is more than some of the crew make in a month. The math still works. The math always works during Prohibition, provided nobody shoots you. Somebody sometimes shoots you. The competition on the water is not purely commercial. Hijacking a rum runner's load is faster than buying your own inventory, and the hijackers don't need to pay for a boat at anchor 3 miles out. They need a faster boat and fewer scruples, both of which the era produces in quantity. Some nights on the Long Island Sound, what you're listening for isn't the Coast Guard, it's the other kind of fast boat. Back on the beach, there are men with trucks. The trucks have false floors. The crates go under the false floors. The trucks are registered to a linen supply company, which is not in the linen business, or a produce distributor, which distributes produce the way a speakeasy distributes temperance. They drive toward the city. The city is waiting. The city has been waiting since 1920 and has gotten quite good at it. You are at a bar on 14th Street on a Thursday night when a short, heavy man with a round face and an apologetic smile sits down next to you and orders a beer. The bartender pours him one. The short man is Izzy Einstein. Izzy Einstein has made 4,900 arrests in 5 years by ordering one beer in one bar at a time, and the moment the beer is in his hand, his partner Mo Smith walks in with the warrant. The bartender does not yet know any of this. You do. Izzy's method is barely a method. There isn't much of one. He shows up. He looks like someone's uncle who got a little lost on the way to a card game. Short, heavy, and reliably apologetic. He orders a drink. The drink arrives. And that's the arrest. The Prohibition Bureau officially frowns on elaborate deception, so Izzy's approach is less deception and more just being extremely easy to underestimate. His solve rate is somewhere around 95%. His colleagues have been frowning at this statistic for years. The disguises help. Izzy has arrived at speakeasies dressed as a streetcar conductor, a football player, a fisherman, a gravedigger, specifically a gravedigger who needed something to take the edge off a difficult shift, which is a story nobody at a bar is going to push back on very hard. In New Orleans, he stepped off the train, stood on the platform for 35 seconds, got directions to the nearest speakeasy, walked in, and had a drink in his hand before his luggage arrived. 35 seconds. He was not even trying to be fast. He was just Izzy. Mo Smith is large where Izzy is not. Together they look less like federal agents and more like a vaudeville act that accidentally became law enforcement. Mo stands outside with the paperwork while Izzy sits inside with the beer, And then Mo comes in, and then everyone has a very bad evening except Izzy and Mo, who are having a fine time. They make this look easy because for them, it is easy. The bartender in front of you is currently offering Izzy a second beer. The second beer is a mistake. The Prohibition Bureau was perpetually understaffed and underpaid, a starting salary that made bribery feel less like corruption and more like a reasonable workplace benefit. About 1 in 12 agents was fired for taking money or drinking on the job in any given year. The Bureau kept hiring anyway. It had quotas to meet. Izzy and Mo are the exception, not because they're incorruptible, though they appear to be, but because they're genuinely good at the part everyone else finds difficult, which is walking into a room and convincing it you belong there. A Prohibition agent named Russell Norris once spent 40 minutes outside a speakeasy on West 46th Street trying to work up the nerve to knock. Izzy would have been on his third drink by then. Russell Norris is not famous. The bartender down the bar, his name is Frank, and he's been wiping the same glass for 6 minutes in a way that suggests the glass is not the thing he's thinking about, has seen agents before. Wooden ones. Agents who stand too straight and look at the bottles too carefully and ask for one whiskey with the slight over-enunciation of a man who learned the phrase this morning. Frank can spot those. Frank cannot spot Izzy because Izzy is not performing anything. He is just sitting there looking round and apologetic and entirely at home, which he is, because every bar is Izzy's home. The beer is almost gone now. You watch the door. You are sitting at a table near the back when the front door comes off its hinges and 3 men in dark coats walk in with badges held above their heads. The lights stay on. The music stops mid-phrase. The bartender is already at the panel. The panel is already in position. By the time the agents reach the bar, the shelves behind it have tilted forward and the bottles have slid down a chute, and the chute has emptied into the city sewer. The bar is dry. The agents look at the bar looks back. The 21 Club on West 52nd Street has a wine cellar door that weighs 2.5 tons and opens only when someone inserts a wire into a hole in the wall that most people will walk past 40 times without noticing. The speakeasy isn't just a room with bad lighting, it's a room that has rehearsed this moment. Behind the door, thousands of bottles, labelled and numbered and filed by owner, like a public storage unit except the staff brings your gin to your table. When agents come, the wire doesn't get inserted. The door is a wall. The wall has always been a wall. The button is the cheaper version. Not every place has a chute. Not every place has a 2.5-ton door. But most places above a certain tier have something, a signal, a lever, a phrase hollered from the front, a bartender named Gerald who moves at a specific speed when he's not alarmed and a completely different speed when he is. Gerald Kowalski, at a place on South Wabash, keeps a damp rag in his left hand at all times. The rag is small, grey, and faintly soapy. When the rag lands on the bar, everyone in the room understands. Nobody taught them this. It accumulated. The agents know about the button. They've been raiding these places for 3 years, and they know about the button the way you know the plot of a movie you've seen too many times. So, they come faster now. They come in through 2 doors when there are 2 doors. They come in through the kitchen. They come in through the back alley with someone's elbow on the fire exit bar before the signal can travel. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the bar is stripped before they clear the threshold and the only evidence is a faint smell of juniper and the sewer outside smelling unusually festive. Finding the bottles isn't really the point anymore. The point, increasingly, is the fine. The fine, the arrest, the paperwork, the court date, and then the court date getting quietly cancelled because someone's already made a phone call. A mid-sized Manhattan operation pays roughly $400 a month to the local precinct, which is basically a standing arrangement nobody writes down, except the standing arrangement is what keeps the gin flowing and the phone calls going through. Judges in some districts dismiss so many Volstead cases that the docket clerk has a stamp made. The stamp is used frequently. The stamp is tired. You at the back table haven't moved. This is also rehearsed. You hold your glass. Your glass holds water, because sometime in the last 45 seconds it became water. You don't know how. You didn't see anyone near it. The water is slightly warm and has an opinion about what it used to be, but it is water. The man 2 tables over is reading a newspaper that wasn't in his hand 60 seconds ago. The woman across from him is powdering her nose with the focused attention of someone who absolutely was not just drinking whiskey. The agents take names. The names will not match the names on the lease, which will not match the name of the holding company, which is registered to a man in Newark who doesn't know he owns anything. This is standard. This is Tuesday. One of the agents, young, still wearing the expression of someone who believes paperwork leads somewhere, writes everything down in a small notebook. His partner, older, does not have a notebook out. His partner is looking at the ceiling with the face of a man doing the arithmetic on how many more of these nights remain before his pension. You sit in a jury room on the 4th floor of the federal courthouse on Foley Square at 3:30 p.m., and the foreman polls the room. 12 hands go up. 12 hands say not guilty. The evidence was uncontested. The defendant was caught with 80 cases of bourbon in the back of a delivery truck registered in his name. None of you talked about the case. None of you needed to. The foreman writes not guilty on a piece of paper and signs it, and the rest of you go home. There's no form for what just happened, no checkbox. The verdict looks identical to every other not guilty verdict. Same paper, same signature, same bailiff reading it aloud. The difference is that everyone in the room knew the defendant was guilty, and everyone in the room decided that didn't matter. The law existed, the jury existed. The two declined to interact. Legal scholars who studied Volstead prosecutions in the 1920s found acquittal rates so high in certain jurisdictions that federal prosecutors stopped bringing cases to trial and simply offered plea deals at the door. New York juries acquitted in bootlegging cases at a rate that caused one federal judge, learned hand, to describe the situation publicly as a collapse of the enforcement mechanism. He used more formal language. That was what he meant. The jurors weren't criminals. They were your neighbors, the butcher from 2 blocks over, the woman who teaches piano on Thursday afternoons, the retired postal inspector who drinks rye at the Elks Club every Friday. They sat in that box and looked at 80 cases of bourbon and thought, I have been to a speakeasy. My wife has been to a speakeasy. My alderman has been to a speakeasy. The alderman's wife has been to a speakeasy, and she had a better time than any of us. A juror named Walter Hoffmeister, a grain merchant from Queens, is reported to have said afterward, to no one in particular, that he didn't see the point. He said it while putting on his coat. He did not elaborate. The coat went on. Walter went home. The prosecutors knew. The defense attorneys knew. The judge, who had seen 47 Volstead acquittals in the previous 18 months, had developed a particular expression he used when reading verdicts in these cases. Flat, unhurried, and faintly resigned. The expression of a man who has been told the same thing 47 times and stopped being surprised around number 12. The numbers behind the courtroom were always going to lose. There were never enough agents, the speakeasies always outnumbered them, and the pay was less than a parking enforcement officer makes today, which partly explains the corruption rate and partly explains why federal prohibition agent was not a career aspiration. You took the job. The job took something from you in return. The exchange rate varied, and yet the cases kept coming. Prosecutors filed, juries assembled, evidence was presented. The evidence was often unambiguous. The bourbon is in the truck. The truck has your name on the registration. Here is the registration. And the jury went into the room and came back with 12 hands up, and the court reporter wrote it all down, and the defendant walked out onto Foley Square blinking in the afternoon light, probably already thinking about dinner. Somewhere in the basement of that courthouse, a clerk filed the acquittal in a folder. The folder joined other folders. The folders filled a cabinet. The cabinet filled a room. The room became, in its way, the most accurate document of prohibition that exists. Not the law, not the amendment, not the speeches. Just 12 hands, raised again and again, in a room on the 4th floor. You sit across from a man named Pat in the back booth of a chop house on West 47th Street, and the two of you agree on a number. The number is $400. $400 a month, paid in cash on the 1st, hand-delivered to a specific address by you personally. In exchange, the precinct does not raid your club. The precinct also does not arrest your bartender, does not arrest your doorman, does not arrest your customers. Pat eats a piece of bread. Pat orders the steak. You order the steak too. The $400 covers the precinct captain and filters down from there in amounts that Pat handles and that you don't ask about. The detective who walks past your door twice a night gets something. The beat cop who stands outside on Tuesdays gets something smaller. The distribution is Pat's architecture, not yours. You just supply the first number and the bread on which the whole structure rests. $400 buys very specific things. It buys a patrol car that drives slowly past your block instead of stopping. It buys a phone call on the rare occasions someone above Pat decides to look interested in your address. It buys a 45-minute warning before anyone knocks. 45 minutes is enough to move the bottles. 45 minutes is enough to send the customers home through the kitchen. 45 minutes is, in practice, more protection than a locked door and a very large doorman combined. $400 a month in 1925 is roughly what a schoolteacher earns in 2 months. The schoolteacher does not have Pat's number. The math is funny once you write it down. Your club grosses somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a week on a good week. The 400 is a rounding error. It's a delivery fee. It's less than you spend on gin that same month, and considerably less than the gin costs you when the gin is bad and 3 customers get sick and one of them tells a friend and the friend tells a friend. The bribe is, by any sober accounting, the cheapest line on the ledger. It sits in the books beside rent and ice. Pat finishes his bread. He doesn't write anything down, because Pat doesn't write anything down. A sergeant named Cranner on the other side of Manhattan also doesn't write anything down. Neither does the magistrate's clerk who processes the rare case that makes it past Pat's architecture and into actual paperwork. The paperwork, when it exists, describes your establishment as a soft drink parlour. You sell soft drinks. You sell many soft drinks, at 25 cents each. The soft drinks contain gin. The arrangement has texture. There are months when Pat needs something extra, a friend of Pat's is getting married, or a friend of Pat's cousin needs a favour that costs money, and on those months the first includes a small additional envelope that neither of you discusses. You leave it in the bread basket. This is not a metaphor. The bread basket is small, woven, and reliably patient. It has done this work before. It knows its function. The basket has opinions about discretion and has never once let Pat down. And yet the arrangement is also genuinely fragile in ways that have nothing to do with Pat's integrity. A new captain arrives at the precinct and needs to establish his own number, which is different from the old number, which means another dinner at another chop house and another steak. A federal agent, not Pat's jurisdiction, Pat can't help with federal, decides your block is interesting, and begins walking past with the energy of a man who does not yet have a number. That's a different conversation, that's a different chop house. The federal agent earns little enough that negotiation is theoretically possible, though the ones who take it usually transfer quickly and the ones who don't take it are the ones you genuinely cannot afford to interest. Izzy Einstein, famously, doesn't take it. Izzy Einstein also got a drink in New Orleans in 35 seconds, which tells you something about the general state of the infrastructure you're navigating. You pay for the steaks. You pay for Pat's steak. This is understood. Pat doesn't offer. You don't wait. The check arrives, you handle it, and the two of you walk out onto West 47th Street in opposite directions. And tomorrow the number is in an envelope, and the envelope is in a specific hand, and your doors open at 8, and the soft drinks flow freely, and the arrangement holds for another 30 days. You wake up on the floor of a friend's apartment at 10:15 a.m. with a headache that arrives before you open your eyes. The headache is not a regular headache. The headache is a chemical event. The bathtub gin from last night was made by someone you do not know, in a bathtub you have never seen, using industrial alcohol that may or may not have been properly washed of the methanol the federal government required to be added to it. You sit up slowly. You count to 10. You wait. The bottle had 4 ingredients you wouldn't have chosen. The federal government, operating on the theory that Americans would not drink industrial alcohol if it tasted terrible enough, required manufacturers to denature it with methanol, benzene, cadmium, and kerosene. This was not a rumour. This was policy. The denaturing program had a budget, a bureaucracy, and a filing system. Between 1920 and 1933, somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 Americans died from it. The range is wide because nobody was keeping tidy records on that particular outcome. Christmas, 1926 in New York. 32 people dead in 24 hours. Not in a war, not in a flood, from the liquor. The holiday weekend edition. The federal government issued a statement. The statement did not contain an apology. It contained, roughly speaking, a reminder that drinking was illegal, which was felt by many surviving relatives to miss the point somewhat. The bootleggers knew the industrial supply was dangerous, so the better ones, the ones who considered themselves professionals, redistilled it, filtering out as much of the methanol as the equipment allowed. The phrase for this was cutting the alcohol. The equipment was not always reliable. The filtering was not always complete. A flask operator named Vernon, sweating in a third-floor Bronx kitchen with a rubber tube and a camp stove, was doing his best. Vernon was not a chemist. Vernon was a former shoe salesman who had identified an opportunity. The cocktails arrive as triage: the bee's knees, gin, lemon juice, honey. The sidecar, brandy, orange liqueur, lemon. The between the sheets, which had the same ingredients plus a certain optimism about the evening ahead. These drinks weren't invented because bartenders had a sudden creative awakening. They were invented because the base spirit tasted like something that had opinions about you personally, and the citrus and sugar were performing first aid. The craft cocktail bar you visited last spring, with its dehydrated garnishes and hand-chipped ice, is built on a foundation of someone desperately trying to make rot gut drinkable. It worked. Nobody talks about the rot gut anymore. Meanwhile, if you had the right doctor, you didn't need the Bronx gin at all. Medical prescriptions for whiskey rose from roughly 1 million a year before Prohibition to nearly 11 million by 1928. The prescription cost $3. The whiskey was real, aged, regulated, and produced by licensed distilleries. Brown-Forman kept its license specifically for this purpose. Your doctor wrote for medicinal purposes on a small printed form and handed it across a mahogany desk with the gravity of a man prescribing penicillin. The gravity was the whole service. $3 bought the gravity. 11 million times a year, the gravity was purchased. Nobody's constitution was getting any better, and yet here you are on the floor. You didn't have $3 for the doctor. You had a quarter, which bought you 2 glasses of something at a place where the floor was sawdust and the single bulb overhead had been flickering since Tuesday, and nobody had replaced it because the landlord didn't officially know the place. Existed. The headache is the bill. It arrives with interest. You press 2 fingers to your temple, locate the pain, and decide it is survivable. You have made this calculation before. You make it again now. The glass on the table still has a ½ inch in it. You look at it for a long moment. You leave it there. This is personal growth. You sit at your kitchen table on the morning of December 26, 1926, with the New York Tribune open in front of you, and you read a list of names. 32 names. All of them dead. All of them dead from drinking on Christmas Eve. You scan for names you know. You scan for the names of 3 people you know who were at the same party as you were on Tuesday night. You do not see them on the list. You exhale. You fold the paper. You sit there for a minute. The thing is, you're not even surprised. Not completely. You've been reading these notices for 6 years now. A name here, a name there, an entire paragraph on a slow news week. But 32 in one night is a number that sits differently on the tongue. 32 is a category. 32 is a policy result that someone, somewhere, made a decision about and then went home for the holidays. The federal government knows exactly what's in the bottle. They required it. Methanol, benzene, cadmium, kerosene. The denaturing program was designed to make industrial alcohol undrinkable, which it did, except that people drank it anyway, because the alternative was sobriety, and sobriety in 1926 felt like its own kind of poisoning. The government's position, stated in public with a straight face, was essentially, "We told you not to drink it." That's the whole argument. That's the official response to 32 names in the morning paper. You don't stop drinking. Nobody stops drinking. At least 30 states will end Prohibition with higher alcohol consumption than when it started, which is the kind of public health outcome that takes real institutional commitment to achieve. What you do is get more careful. You start asking questions about where a bottle came from. You develop opinions about sourcing. You become, despite yourself, something of a connoisseur of provenance, the way some people today scrutinize the supply chain of a $12 smoothie, except the stakes are your actual liver. A bootlegger named Garrett works the corner of your block, out of a barber shop with a back room that smells like bay rum and bad decisions. He pours you a short glass and watches your face. The glass is small, heavy, and faintly chipped. You don't fall down. This is the quality guarantee. It's not written anywhere. Garrett tips his chin and says the batch came up from Maryland, not from the city suppliers, and you choose to believe him because the alternative is to never drink again, and you are not prepared to do that at the moment. The numbers behind the 32 are larger than the 32. Somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 Americans will die from tainted government-required alcohol before Prohibition ends in 1933. The range is wide because nobody was keeping precise records, which is its own kind of statement. You keep a loose count in your head, the way people now maintain a vague awareness of how many data breaches have included their email address. Present, cumulative, not quite urgent enough to change the behavior. Somewhere across town, a doctor named Willard is writing his 14th whiskey prescription of the morning, $3 each. The prescription says, for medicinal purposes, and the patient folds it carefully, like a boarding pass to somewhere warmer. By 1928, there'll be 11 million of these written annually. The AMA initially opposed the whole arrangement and then reconsidered when the math became clear. Dr. Willard has a new desk now. The desk has opinions about Prohibition. You pour yourself a coffee. The Tribune is still on the table, folded in half so the list faces down. Outside, someone's dog is barking at something that doesn't exist. It's December 26th and the city is already moving again, the way the city always moves again. And the 32 names are already becoming the kind of news that gets discussed and then absorbed and then forgotten by January when there's a new list to read. You sit in a barber's chair at a shop on 8th Avenue at 4:15 on a Saturday afternoon, and the barber is a man who has cut men's hair for 30 years. He has cut your father's hair. He has cut your husband's hair. You point at a picture in the magazine on your lap and say like this one. The picture shows a woman with hair cut to just below the ears. The barber looks at the picture. The barber looks at you. The barber picks up the scissors. The bob in 1922 is a declaration delivered at about ear level, and everyone in the room, the barber, the other customers, the man reading the newspaper near the window, knows exactly what kind of woman gets one. The kind who goes out at night. The kind who has opinions about her own head. The scissors are already moving before anyone says another word. The flapper aesthetic doesn't assemble itself at home. It gets assembled in public, which is the entire point. The dropped waist, the hemline above the knee, the silk stockings, which cost about a day's wages and roll past the knee on purpose, and you don't need to explain why. The thigh flask is flat, curved, and fitted against your leg under the dress in a way that suggests whoever designed it had a very specific social calendar in mind. It holds about 4 ounces. That's enough to arrive somewhere already relaxed. Before Prohibition, respectable women don't go to saloons. Saloons are for men, and the line is architectural, swinging doors, brass rails, the whole arrangement. Then the saloons close and the speakeasies open, and the speakeasy has no interest in maintaining that particular distinction. The speakeasy needs paying customers. You are a paying customer. The velvet rope, such as it is, doesn't check for a husband. Marilyn Fitch, a name every doorman on West 49th knows, arrives at a peephole, gives a name that isn't hers, and gets waved through without a pause. She does this every Thursday. She does this in a coat with a fur collar that she bought with her own wages, which are wages she earns at a telephone exchange, which is a job that didn't widely exist for women 15 years ago. She sits at a small table, orders a bee's knees, and nobody asks her where her husband is. He's at home. She doesn't mention this. The cocktail itself is a piece of engineering. A straight shot of bathtub gin in 1924 tastes roughly like turpentine that has been briefly introduced to a juniper berry. So the bartenders start adding things. Lemon juice, simple syrup, egg white, sometimes, to smooth the texture, the bee's knees, the sidecar, the between the sheets. Each one a small act of diplomacy in a coupe glass. You're not thinking about any of this. You're thinking about the woman at the next table whose bobbed hair is slightly shorter than yours and whether yours should be shorter. The barber on 8th Avenue took 40 minutes and charged you 60 cents and didn't say a single word after the scissors started moving. He did, when he was finished, hold up the mirror behind your head with the practiced neutrality of a man who has learned that his opinion was not requested. Good man. Smart man. He's been doing this since 1919, and he has watched the picture in the magazine change every 6 months. You unfold the Chicago Tribune on the morning of February 15, 1929, and the front page has 7 photographs on it. The photographs are of 7 men. The 7 men were lined up against a brick wall in a garage on North Clark Street the previous morning and shot. The story underneath the photographs is 2,000 words long. You read all 2,000 words. You read them again. You think about the speakeasy you went to on Tuesday night. You think about the men who poured your drinks. You fold the paper. 7 men. 5 of them were part of Bugs Moran's North Side gang. 2 were civilians who happened to be in the wrong garage, wearing the wrong coats at the wrong time on a Tuesday morning in February. The newspapers call it a massacre before the bodies are cold. The word fits. Nobody argues with it. What you know, and what the Tribune knows, and what everyone in Chicago knows but will not say in print, is that the men who did it dressed as police officers. 2 of them wore uniforms, brass buttons polished, that looked pressed, official, and entirely convincing. They walked in with badges and moved the 7 men against the wall with the quiet authority of a routine shakedown. Then the other 2 men came in behind them and the uniforms made more sense. The men against the wall thought they were being arrested. They were not being arrested. The city has been here before, more or less. There have been bombings, shootings, men found in trunks, men found in rivers, men found in places that required a significant amount of explaining. But something about the photograph stops people. Maybe it's the 7 of them lined up so neatly. Maybe it's the fact that 2 were nobody. A mechanic named John May, an optician named Reinhard Schwimmer, who just liked hanging around gangsters because he found it exciting. Schwimmer found it exciting right up until he didn't. Al Capone is in Florida when it happens. He is, by his own account, enjoying the weather. He has a documented alibi and a Miami tan, and an expression of complete surprise that a drama teacher named Gerald pulls out for the big scene in Act 3. Nobody believes him. Nobody is meant to. A stockbroker on Michigan Avenue looks at the photograph of John May and remembers that John May fixed his Studebaker last August for $4 and didn't overcharge. He sets the paper down. He picks it up again. He reads the caption twice. He's had 9 years of practice not thinking about gang violence, and most of that practice involved minding his own business. The photograph of John May is not letting him do that this morning. The mechanic who fixed the Studebaker is on the front page of the Tribune, and the men who poured the stockbroker's Manhattan last Friday at a club 2 blocks from his office are the same men who put him there. Detective Chief John Egan stands outside the garage on North Clark Street with his hands in his coat pockets. He looks at the wall. He looks at the floor. He does not write anything down for a very long time. Then he writes something down. Public opinion doesn't shift cleanly. It never does. The speakeasies are still full on Wednesday night. On Thursday night. You go back on Thursday night. The drinks are good. The jazz is louder than usual, which is a thing that happens when a room full of people is trying not to think about a brick wall in a garage on North Clark Street. The 7 photographs stay on your kitchen table for 3 days before you throw the paper out. Not because you mean to keep them, you just keep forgetting. You stand in the alley behind your club at 3:15 on a Wednesday morning, and a truck pulls up with no markings on the side. The driver is a man named Sal. Sal does not introduce himself anymore because Sal has been here every Wednesday for 3 years. He opens the back of the truck. He hands you a crate. You hand him an envelope. He hands you another crate. You hand him a second envelope because the first envelope was light. He nods. He closes the truck. He drives away. You carry the crates inside and stack them next to the other crates from Tuesday, which came from a different truck driven by a man who also doesn't introduce himself. The supply chain you're operating isn't glamorous. It isn't Al Capone. It's 2 crates, an alley, and an envelope that had to be a little heavier because Sal remembered what happened the last time it wasn't. The liquor itself comes from 4 places, not the romanticized version, the river pirates and the speedboats, the practical version. Some of it is pre-Prohibition stock, aged in proper barrels in proper warehouses before January 1920, and that supply ran out faster than anyone planned. Some of it is medicinal whiskey, prescribed at $3 a signature by a doctor on Fulton Street, one of the army of physicians who together wrote nearly 11 million prescriptions a year by 1928, which sounds like an exaggeration until you do the math and realize it's worse. Some of it came through Canada, crossed the Detroit River in winter on a horse-drawn sleigh, transferred into the back of a car in Windsor by a man in a heavy coat who did not ask questions, because questions were a taxable commodity. And then some of it is bathtub gin. The bathtub gin is called that because the vessel was literally a bathtub. The bottles were too tall for the kitchen sink, so you used the tub instead. Neutral industrial spirit, juniper berries, sometimes glycerin, if you wanted it to feel like it had opinions. The whole operation costs less than $1 a gallon to produce, which is useful information when you're charging $1.50 for a single glass and telling people it's imported. It's not imported. It was made in apartment 4C at around 11 on a Thursday night by a man named Anton who has cold, deliberate and unhurried hands. The cocktail menu exists because of Anton. The bartenders of the 1920s weren't mixologists. They were engineers solving a problem, and the problem was that the raw material tasted like furniture stripper. Some nights the supply doesn't come from Sal at all. Some nights it comes from a laundry 2 blocks over where the owner, a compact woman named Vera who wears the same apron every day, keeps a room in the back that has nothing to do with laundry. The bottles come in wrapped in linen. They leave in crates. The laundry smells like starch and very faintly like bourbon, which is a combination no one has ever complained about. You pay Vera on Fridays. You pay the police precinct on the 1st of the month, $400, cash, delivered in a plain envelope to a sergeant named Donnelly, who receives it the way a parking meter receives a quarter. Without comment, without gratitude, and with a complete understanding that the transaction isn't personal, it's infrastructure. Donnelly has a family. You have a club. The envelope is the arrangement. Sal pulls up again next Wednesday. The envelope is the right weight this time. He doesn't nod. He just leaves. You stack the new crates next to the old crates and lock the door behind you. You stand in a school gymnasium on East 91st Street on November 8th, 1932, with a ballot in your hand, and you mark a box next to a name. The name is Franklin D. Roosevelt. You are not particularly enthusiastic about Franklin D. Roosevelt. You are voting for him because the Democratic Party platform says repeal, and you are voting for repeal because you are tired. You are tired of the bathtub gin. You are tired of the bribes. You are tired of the people who died on Christmas Eve. You fold the ballot. The people who died on Christmas Eve were 32 of them, in a single 24-hour window in 1926, in New York City alone, not in a war, not in a flood. From drinking liquor that the federal government had required manufacturers to poison with methanol, benzene, cadmium, and kerosene, specifically to stop people from drinking it. The government's position was that if you drank it anyway, that was on you. The government had a very firm position about this. The denaturing program started in 1906 but expanded aggressively under Prohibition, when industrial alcohol became the primary raw material for bootleg spirits. The chemists doing the poisoning weren't rogue. They had budgets. They had memos. A Treasury Department document from 1926 lists the approved formulas with the brisk confidence of a cafeteria menu. Formula 39B, Formula 5, Formula 23A, each one contains something that will kill you if you drink enough of it. The estimates for total deaths run between 10,000 and 50,000 Americans over 13 years. The range is wide because accurate records require someone to care about the number. You mark the box. You slide the ballot into the machine. A volunteer with a clipboard nods at you. The Great Depression arrived in 1929 and began doing something 13 years of moral argument had failed to do. It made repealing Prohibition look financially attractive. The federal government hadn't collected liquor tax revenue since 1920. That was, by 1932, a problem with a dollar sign attached to it. Al Capone had been grossing approximately $60 million a year from bootlegging in Chicago, not the federal government, not the state of Illinois. Al Capone, the Treasury Department, which had spent a decade poisoning the supply, was now watching from the sidelines while organized crime ran an industry it used to tax. Their internal memos that year run pages on lost revenue and a paragraph on the deaths. Roosevelt wins. He wins by a margin that is less a preference and more a verdict. Hoover carries 6 states. You could fit the states Hoover carries into the states Roosevelt carries and still have room for your feelings about bathtub gin. The Cullen-Harrison Act passes in March 1933, legalizing beer and wine up to 3.2% ABV before repeal is even finalized. The logic is that 3.2% probably isn't intoxicating. Whether 3.2% is technically intoxicating is a question that approximately no one is asking with genuine curiosity. On April 7, 1933, legal beer goes on sale for the first time in 13 years. A truck driver named Gerald Eggers delivers a case to the White House. Roosevelt reportedly says, "I think this would be a good time for a beer." He is not wrong. December 5, 1933. The 21st Amendment is ratified. It is the only constitutional amendment ratified by state conventions rather than state legislatures, because Congress didn't trust state legislatures to get it done, And honestly, looking at state legislatures, that was a reasonable call. Prohibition ends at 5:32 p.m. Eastern Time. In Times Square, a man named Harold Swartz, who has been standing outside a liquor store since noon, becomes the first person in New York City to legally purchase a bottle of whiskey in 13 years. He buys two. He is a planner. The speakeasies don't all close. Some of them just take down the peephole panels and open the front door. The 21 Club keeps the 2.5-ton wine cellar door. It is still there. It still opens with a wire inserted into a small hole in the wall. They kept it because it works, and because some things are too good to dismantle just because you're no longer required to hide. You walk into a bar on 3rd Avenue at 1 minute past midnight on April 7, 1933, and the bar is open. The bar has its name above the door. The bar has a sign in the window that says beer. You order a beer. The bartender hands you a glass of pale yellow liquid that is exactly 3 2/10% alcohol by volume, because the new federal law specifies 3 2/10% and not 1/100th more. You take a sip. You set the glass down. You order a second. The crowd that night is not celebrating. Exactly. Celebrating implies surprise. Everyone in the room knew this was coming. What they're doing is something more like exhaling. 13 years of held breath let out in a single long Tuesday night. The man next to you at the bar has his hat on. He doesn't take it off. He just sits there with a glass of legal beer and the expression of someone who has been proven right after a very long time and doesn't need to make a scene about it. 3 2/10% means the beer is real. It does not mean it's strong. Pre-Prohibition beer was typically 4 to 5%. The breweries that survived 13 years of dormancy, and not many did, are now producing a product that is thin, pale, and faintly apologetic, technically legal and technically beer and technically not quite the same thing as what everyone remembers. The industry calls it near beer's tougher cousin. Nobody else calls it that. Everyone else just drinks it. The speakeasies don't close overnight. That would be too clean. Your neighborhood joint on the ground floor of a building that officially sells shoe polish and definitely does not sell rye whiskey, that place is still open on April 8th and April 9th, and most of May. Because the Cullen-Harrison Act legalizes beer, not spirits, and the spirits market is still entirely underground for another 8 months until December. The hidden infrastructure of 13 years doesn't fold up and file itself away just because a single category goes legitimate. The peephole slides shut and opens again the same as always. Meanwhile, someone at the 21 Club is looking at a 2.5-ton wine cellar door and doing math. The hidden bar, the bottle chute, the shelf-tipping mechanism that dumps evidence directly into the city sewer, all of it still operational, still necessary, still, technically, the business model. The December repeal is 8 months away. 8 months is a long time to leave infrastructure idle. A bartender named Hank has been making bathtub gin in a rented room on West 47th Street since 1921, does not immediately retire. Hank's operation costs him under $1 a gallon to produce. Hank is charging $12 a bottle to 3 different speakeasies, 2 social clubs, and a dentist who has never asked follow-up questions. Hank's math still works through December. Hank keeps the bathtub. By the time December 5th arrives, the country has been practicing for 8 months. Beer is legal. The transition from illegal spirits to legal ones is less a rupture than a slow handoff. The underground operations don't vanish. Some of them just get licenses. A man who spent a decade bribing a precinct captain to look away from his bar applies for a permit in the same building, at the same address, with the same bar top and the same bartender. The precinct captain attends the opening. He orders a beer. Hank keeps the bathtub. Sergeant Donnelly keeps collecting an envelope. Only now it's for a different favor for a different friend on a different street. The men who drove unmarked trucks at 3 a.m. learn that nothing about the unmarked truck has to change. The product changes, the route changes. The envelope arrives on the 1st of the month exactly as it did in 1929. You finish your second beer. The bar closes at 2. You walk home on a street with other people walking home from bars. Nobody looking over their shoulder, nobody palming a flask, nobody checking the peephole slide before they knock. You've been doing those things for 13 years. You don't stop all at once. You just do them a little less each week, and eventually you forget you were ever doing them at all. It's a very American ending. Not a bang. Just a Tuesday. You stand at the bar of a hotel on West 44th Street on the evening of December 5th, 1933, and the radio behind the bar is broadcasting from Salt Lake City. The radio is waiting for Utah. Utah is the last state needed. At 7:03 Eastern Time, the radio announces that Utah has ratified the 21st Amendment. The bartender pours a row of whiskeys down the length of the bar. The bartender pours them from a bottle with a federal tax stamp. The federal tax stamp is brand new. The whiskey is not new. Most of it has been sitting in someone's basement or warehouse or the back of a truck since roughly 1926. It's been cut and recut and moved across 3 state lines under a false invoice. It tastes like it knows this about itself. You drink it anyway, because the whiskey being legal is the point, not the whiskey being good. 13 years, 10 months, and 19 days of a law that approximately nobody followed has just ended. The Volstead Act, which had defined intoxicating liquor as anything over 0.5% alcohol, which is a definition so aggressive that ripe fruit would technically need a lawyer, is gone. The 18th Amendment is gone. This is the only time in American history one constitutional amendment has been repealed by another. The 21st Amendment is also the only amendment ratified by state conventions rather than state legislatures, because Congress didn't entirely trust state legislatures to do the math on this one. Reasonable call. The bar around you fills quickly, not the way speakeasies filled, with that low electric relief of people arriving somewhere they weren't supposed to be. This is louder, more relaxed. The specific tension of illegality is gone, and its absence has a texture. The room sounds different without it. Somebody at the end of the bar is laughing too hard at something that isn't that funny. He's been saving that laugh for a while. A waiter named Joseph, who has been carrying drinks to this bar for 11 years while technically working at a private club, moves between tables with his shoulders noticeably lower than usual. He sets down a gin and tonic without glancing at the door first. He doesn't check the door. He's been checking the door since 1922, and tonight his neck has simply stopped doing that. It'll take another few months before it stops entirely. The numbers on what just happened are not subtle. New York City, at its peak, had somewhere between 20,000 and 100,000 speakeasies operating simultaneously, against 15,000 legal saloons before Prohibition. The law meant to eliminate drinking had produced, conservatively, a drinking infrastructure 6 times larger than the one it replaced. The 18th Amendment is the only piece of federal legislation that successfully made the thing it banned more popular. And then there's what it cost. 10,000 Americans dead from government-poisoned industrial alcohol, by conservative estimate. 50,000 by the upper range. The federal denaturing program, the one that required manufacturers to add methanol, benzene, cadmium, and kerosene to industrial spirits specifically to make them lethal, had been a deliberate policy. Somebody approved that memo. The memo had a signature. The signature went to work the next morning and had lunch. A man named Charles Luciano, who has spent the past decade routing illegal liquor up the Atlantic seaboard, sits in a corner booth at a different establishment uptown and signs a paper agreeing to a heroin shipment from Marseille. He uses the same supplier in the same coat in the same alley with the same envelope on the 1st of the month. The truck doesn't notice it's carrying something different. Sergeant Donnelly doesn't notice either. He has a family. The envelope is still the arrangement. You finish the whiskey. It's not good. You order another. The bartender pours it openly, in full light, from a bottle on a shelf that isn't attached to any kind of hidden hinge mechanism. The bottle is just a bottle. The shelf is just a shelf. The bar is just a bar. It's been a while since any of those things were just what they were. And that's where the night ends. The peephole has closed. The music has stopped. The bartender has pressed the button. The bottles, all of them, are halfway down the chute to the sewer. You arrived through a laundry, said a word through a panel the size of a deck of cards, and stepped into a basement that smelled like sawdust, mildew, and somebody else's bathtub. You drank a cocktail invented specifically to disguise its own ingredients. You tipped a Charleston dancing waiter without seeing him stop. You watched a silver flask appear from under a silk stocking with the unhurried efficiency of a magician working a private show. You paid 17 of today's dollars for honey, lemon, and a faint chemical whisper of juniper. You went home before the sun came up. Nobody noticed when you left. Tonight, be quietly grateful that the gin in your kitchen is what the label says it is. Be quietly grateful that no federal chemist has been asked this week to add anything extra to the alcohol supply on your behalf. Be grateful that nobody had to bribe a precinct captain to let you read about any of this. Be grateful that the only thing your bathtub holds is water, that the warning label on the grape juice in your refrigerator means exactly what it appears to mean, and that the only door you have to remember the password for is the one to your own apartment. Let your shoulders drop. Let the basement go. Let the night belong to the rest of America, the one with the federal tax stamps and the legal beer. The peephole, tonight, stays closed. Sleep well.